Hello and welcome to our annual You Do Not Have to Be an Astronaut to Work in Space panel for World Space Week 2025. It's lovely to see so many of you here. We'll be hearing from three amazing people who have jobs in space. But before we hear from them, I want to let you know how you can join in today. Your microphones and cameras have been turned off for this event, but at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. This is where you can post your questions to our speakers throughout the session. We can't promise to answer all of them, but we'll do our very best to get to as many of them as possible. So back to those we'll hear from today. We have Mark, Moni and Vic. We will hear from each of them and then we'll take your questions at the very end. So without further delay, let's go to our first speaker, Mart. Mart is a senior lecturer and his work focuses on the icy moons of the outer solar system. Take it away, Mart.
Thanks very much, Alice. Yes, I'm Mark Fox-Powell. I'm a senior lecturer with the AstrobiologyOU research group at the Open University. The focus of my work are icy moons in the outer solar system. So on the screen here, you're seeing an image of Jupiter's moon, Europa. So this is one of the four Galilean moons of Jupiter. And the surface, although it has this kind of brown color, actually is ice. But what you're seeing here is evidence of activity from beneath. So there's a lot of cracks and what looks like disruptions to this icy surface, and that's evidence of something going on underneath the surface of Europa. And we now actually know that there are a number of icy worlds in the solar system that have large oceans of liquid water under their surfaces. And Europa here is one of these. This image is actually constructed from images taken by the Galileo spacecraft in the late 90s. But how did I get to this point of working, studying these really exciting icy worlds? So I actually kind of came through kind of a varied path to get to where I am now. My first degree was actually in marine biology. So you can see in the upper left here, that's an image of me during my degree at the University of Plymouth doing some scuba diving. And before that, if we go way back, as a child, I lived in California, and I was actually really lucky enough to go on a school trip to NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. And this is at the time the Cassini spacecraft, which is a probe that studied the Saturn system, its rings, its moon, the planet Saturn itself, over the period between 2004 and 2017. The spacecraft, when I was a school child, was actually still being assembled for launch at JPL. And I had the privilege of seeing this spacecraft in the clean room. It kind of looked like you're seeing in the middle of the screen here. It's covered in its reflective foil for its cruise through space on its way to Saturn. And I think it's really lodged in my head a real fascination with space and planetary science. So despite the fact that I went to university to do marine biology, I've kind of led full circle and I'm back to kind of space science again. And the way I like to think about it is I'm connecting these two interests of mine because we are working on these ocean worlds, these icy worlds in the outer solar system that have oceans. So I'm kind of, in a way, applying my marine biology training to space sciences. And this picture of me here in the Arctic is actually in Svalbard. As a part of my job now, I'm involved in field research. It's kind of one of the strands of the research we have going on here. And we do this to visit areas on Earth's surface that have some similarity to the icy worlds. And I'll cover a little bit more of that as we go through. That gives you a flavor of how I ended up where I am now. And as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, I spent a bit of time in Scotland, PhD at the University of Edinburgh after my marine biology degree, and I was a postdoctoral researcher in St Andrews before moving here to the OU. So oceans, I've already introduced these ocean worlds. What do I mean by oceans? Well, these are vast quantities of liquid water. We have a really good example on the Earth. We have many oceans on the Earth, which we know are teeming with life. But we now know that oceans are actually common beyond Earth. So these are actually six if you include the Earth, ocean worlds in our solar system that we know have these vast oceans. So we have three moons of Jupiter at the top. This is Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Europa you've already seen an image of. And then we also have two moons of Saturn, Titan and Enceladus. And as well as these, there's actually a growing list of other objects. So these are other moons of giant planets. So we have some of the other moons of Saturn, like Mimas. We have dwarf planets like Ceres and Pluto. And we also have potentially all of the large moons of Uranus. And these kind of blue-yellow pixelated dots in the lower left-hand corner, these are actually images from the James Webb Space Telescope of Kuiper Belt objects, Eris and Makemake, which again, we have some evidence that they might have oceans under the surface. So there's actually a growing list of these objects, and it seems now that we're looking out into the solar system in more detail that oceans beneath an icy crust is actually a really common feature of our solar system. So what do I mean by that? So here's a kind of cutaway of what these icy worlds could look like. We have a core and a rocky interior, which is this kind of brown color. And then you can see this thin band of blue beneath this ice crust, and that's what we call the ocean. And on Europa, that ocean is actually up to 100 kilometers deep, so it's a very significant amount of water. Here's an artist's impression on the right of what it could look like. We have the ocean is interacting with that rocky core. We might have geological activity down there that's interacting with that ocean. And then above this, we have an icy crust, which itself actually hosts a whole load of geological processes that we're only just beginning to understand now. And there's a lot of water, as I mentioned. So Europa, if you ball up all of that water on Europa into one ball, you can see it represented here on the screen. So Europa itself is this small white sphere. It's about the size of our moon. All the water on Europa would ball up to be about twice the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined, which is this smaller ball on the right-hand side on the Earth. So it really begs the question, you know, on Earth where we have water, we find life in general. So the question is, where there's water, is there also life? So here's an artist's impression. This is actually done by one of our postdocs here at the Open University, showing the ice crust and the possible geological activity in the ocean below. Now, we can't access that ocean directly because of this thick ice layer. This ice layer could be up to, say, 30 kilometers thick or even thicker. So getting to that ocean and to study it is really, really challenging. And it also means that sunlight doesn't penetrate, doesn't actually deliver the energy for photosynthesis like we have on the Earth. Instead, we have to rely on other processes to support the potential for life there. And that could be something like deep sea hydrothermal vents. So here's an image on screen of deep sea hydrothermal vents on the Earth in the mid-Atlantic ridge. And you can see these absolutely packed full of life. I mean, there's crabs, you can see there's these giant red worms, the tube worms, and all of these are existing without sunlight input. They are actually using chemical energy from the geological processes to support the life. So we think it's plausible that this is happening at the icy worlds as well. And really what we want to do is to find out. We want to know what's going on in these oceans. And that's where the work we do here at the OU really comes in. So here's a artist's impression again of the kind of icy crust of one of these worlds. And I mentioned that it's really difficult to access this ocean directly. We'd have to drill through many kilometers of ice. But actually, nature is giving us a way of studying this ocean without having to drill. So you can see represented on here are various things, like we have a kind of icy volcano here. We have potential upwelling of warmer ocean water coming up and being emerging onto the surface through maybe cracks in the ice. And we have plenty of evidence that these kinds of processes are operating at worlds like Europa and Saturn's moon Enceladus. So our job here in the laboratory and in the field is to figure out how ocean fluids are affected by these processes. What are we actually looking for on the surface to find evidence of the ocean water when it's frozen there on the surface? A good example of this is Saturn's moon Enceladus. This is one of my favorite solar system images. It's Saturn backlit by the sun, taken by Cassini, the Cassini spacecraft, the one that I saw in a clean room in JPL when I was a child. And this really kind of diffuse dusty ring is called the E-ring. And it's all coming from Enceladus, a tiny moon of Saturn. You can see here, Enceladus has these large plumes coming out of its south pole. And we actually now know that these plumes are emerging directly from that ocean. So you can see on the right-hand side, another artist's impression of the Cassini spacecraft flying through these plumes and collecting material from the ocean and actually analyzing it on the spacecraft. So work in our team involves understanding how the conditions in these plumes affect that material that Cassini encountered. And we do this with a three-pronged approach. We use experiments in the lab to look at how ocean droplets of this ocean water might evolve as they freeze, might change chemically. We use computer simulations, and we also go to environments on Earth's surface that have some similarity. And a good example of that is actually in Iceland. So we have geysers in Iceland, as you can see on the right-hand side, this erupting geyser. And we can study the chemistry and even the biology of material in that plume to help us understand the same kinds of processes going on at Saturn's moons. Another good example of what we do in the lab is we study how ocean waters might be appear at the surface when they're subject to the extremely low temperatures on the surfaces of these icy worlds. And a good example of that is recently we've discovered actually a new type of salt. It doesn't sound that exciting, but this is actually really, really important because this type of salt only forms when salty water, like ocean water on Earth, freezes really rapidly. So we could actually, if we see this stuff on the surfaces of a moon like Europa, it tells us that that's a location where maybe a plume had happened in the past and water from the ocean had been delivered to the surface. So these spacecrafts could actually use a material like this to kind of help us pinpoint locations where we might go and search for evidence of life from that ocean below. So this work was led by my postdoc Rachel, and you can find out more if you follow that link. So I'm just going to leave it there, and I'll leave up on the slide the team who are involved in this work. It's very much not a one-man band. So yeah, thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Mark. That was absolutely fascinating. So if you've got any questions for Mark, can you please pop them in the Q&A bot, and we will get to them as soon as we've heard from all our panelists. Next up, we have Moni. Moni is a PhD student within the School of Physical Sciences at the Open University, and she is researching planetary and lunar science. So over to you, Moni.
Okay, thank you, Alice. It's a pleasure to be a part of this panel. My name is Moni Boruah. I am a PhD student at Open University, and I'm in a journey to become a planetary scientist soon. But I don't go to space because sometimes space can come to you in the form of small meteorites. I'll first start talking about what I do in my PhD, and then I'll walk you through how I landed up doing what I'm currently doing. So my PhD in a nutshell would be is to look about the origin of water on the moon. You might have come across every now and then in the news that there are certain missions going to the moon with a common motive of water. On your screen, you can see NASA Viper, LUPEX, and Artemis, all with a common goal of water, how much water is present on the moon, in what form it is present on the moon, and how well it is distributed on the moon. But why do we care so much about the water on the moon? Now, if you just look at Earth and Moon together, you can see that 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with liquid water, which you don't see in the Moon because most of it is hidden in the lunar poles or it is hidden in the minerals which are present in the rocks. Second observation that you could have is the cloud cover on the above the Earth, which is quite dense compared to the moon, because again, Earth has thick atmosphere while the moon doesn't. And the most important thing is plate tectonics, which is responsible for continuously cycling the lithosphere of the Earth, but that again doesn't happen in the moon. That means whatever happens in the moon stays in the moon, which makes moon one of the natural laboratory in space. Now, moon was basically formed when a Mars-sized object collided with the Earth, and the material from both that object and Earth combined together to form the moons. So if we are able to figure out or narrow down the sources which were responsible for contributing the water on the moon, we might also be able to understand why do we have so much of water on the Earth. And that in return might help us to understand the presence of water on the Mars. And like Mark mentioned earlier, presence of water can help us to probably understand the evolution or the beginning of how the early forms of life and microbes started. But to know how much water, to figure out the origin of water, we need to first measure the water. So we measure them in the rocks which are collected by the Apollo astronauts during the Apollo missions. And now, as a part of my PhD, the samples that I work on are very special. And that's because 50 years ago, when these Apollo astronauts brought back all the samples to the Earth, the analytical techniques that they have during that time to measure the volatiles were not as advanced as they are now. So they decided to store a few kilograms of samples away for the future use. And so when I was about to start my PhD around 2023, or just a year ahead, they issued this sample for the scientific interest so that people could work on it and using the high-tech instruments that we have available now. And as a part of the PhD, I had the opportunity to work with some of those samples. In the picture, you can see the astronaut. His name is Harrison Smith. Is the first geologist to ever go to space. And I basically have the samples from the core he is currently holding there that I study on day-to-day basis. But other than the Apollo rocks, sometimes the space comes to us in the form of meteorites. Now, on their trajectory to Earth, they burn. Hence, their surface is quite dark, which we call it as fusion crust. So they can be easily spotted in something which is in a very planar surface, like in a cold desert, sometimes also in a hot desert. And if you're very lucky enough, you can even find them in your driveway, like Witchcombe. In that case, you're very lucky. I do wear my spacesuit, which is very different from the one the astronauts wear, but it is good enough for me to do whatever work I'm doing while being a space scientist on Earth. And then I basically prepare my samples in a very smaller chips, and then I put it in this big instrument that helps me measure how much of water is present in those samples, and that kind of helps me to determine what could be the possible sources that could have contributed to the water in the moon. But to do all of these, I have made a really long journey. And I say that because I come from a very small village in a state called Assam from India. Now, Assam is world famous for its tea. Even you can find the tea packets in Tesco if you go looking for them someday. But I would say growing up, I didn't know what I wanted to be. And it had a lot to do with where I was born and my surrounding. Because the place where I was born, and considering my parents, most people there were literate, but they were not educated. So there was no one there to kind of guide me to decide what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do in life. And second thing was, I was born as a girl. So especially in a very remote place in India, as a woman, you are all ideally told what you could be instead of asking you what you want to be. But the ignition for space was planted in me at a very young age when I was a little girl. And there was a news article that my dad read out to me was about Kalpana Chawla. It was in 2003, I think, when they boarded the spacecraft, Space Shuttle Columbia, to go to the space. Now, she's not here with us anymore, but she lives among the young girls in India, not just girls, irrespective of gender, I would say, in the form of an inspiration. And when I read about her at a very young age, I used to think that, oh, she did her engineering and degrees in astrophysics and maybe aeronautical engineering, and she was very smart and intelligent to do what she was doing today. And I was none of it. So I used to think that is working in space, being part of a space is not my cup of tea. As usual, like everybody, I did my 10th board exams, which is very much similar to GCSEs from the village school. And up till that point, I was a very mediocre student, average scoring. But during my GCSE results, even to my surprise and to everybody's surprise, I did extremely good and I was a school topper. That's when my parents realized that I could have potential and they decided to send me out of the village, irrespective of people telling them that, oh, you should save your money for your girl's marriage and not for instead of sending her for higher education. But my parents were like, no, let's send her to the city school. So I went to the city school. I did my A levels, which is like 12 board exams there. And I was very much focused on triple sciences and advanced maths. But just like every other Indian parent, they gave me two options to do after I was done with A levels. That was either become a doctor or an engineer, instead of asking me what I wanted to become. And being like a very obedient child, I was like, okay, let's do engineering. So I started with that. but it didn't took me long to figure out that that's where I didn't belong, and I decided to quit engineering in 6 months. And then I used up my remaining 6 months of the year for the first time in 18 years of my existence, figuring out what I really wanted to do. So it took me 18 years to finally ask myself the question, what I really wanted to do or who I wanted to become. That's when I figured out I really like rocks. And I looked through the various university prospects all throughout the India to figure out whether I can have a degree in earth science or not. And I did. Ended up doing undergraduate and postgraduate degree in geology. So when I was almost finishing up my master's degree, it was 2019 when we were hit by COVID-19 pandemic. And because of the upbringing that I had, again, lack of awareness my parents had and guidance I had, and the next task I was set up was to like get a job so that I could have much more nicer prospects in getting married properly. Uh, but I wanted to not get married and I wanted to have a career. But around that time, because of the COVID-19 pandemic and with an earth science degree, which would be mostly related to field related job, it was very much harder to get a job in earth science. And I was basically jobless for 2 years, but then almost I decided to like quit research, quit the field of geology, and I ended up and a job was offered to me in Indo-German Science and Technology Center. It was a company which is run by Ministry of Science and Technology in India and German Aerospace Center, where it's basically a funding organization where I was dealing with 3 or 4 fellowships, and I was helping PhD students of my age to get industrial experience outside India, or more like a scientific exchange. And while I was helping students of my age doing PhD in India to go abroad and have more research experience, I kept on thinking that if they can do it, why can't I do it? So that was like an eye opener for me, and that's when I started looking for PhD projects, and I landed up in a planetary science PhD project here at Open University. And it took me near about 5 years of academic gap to do what I am doing currently. And by the time I was started my PhD, I was already 28. So yeah, I did not get married. I figured out what I wanted to do, and I love what I'm doing currently. Like, I speak about what I do to every student I get. I present my research, and I'm still enjoying my tea from my steak. So in an ideal case, somebody would think that you need to do your graduation, you need to have a job, and you need to earn money, and it always doesn't go like that. We are meant to fail. We are not. It is ideal to not know what you want to do, where you want to be, when to start, when not to start. It's ideal to fail. It's just important that we keep going. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moni. That was absolutely fascinating. And if you've got any questions for Moni, please pop them in the Q&A box and we will come and get to them as soon as we finish with our final speaker, who is Vic. Vic is a senior lecturer and an associate director of the AstrobiologyOU. Vic, if you take it away, please.
Okay, thanks, Alice. So my name is Vic Pearson. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Physical Sciences, where I am in planetary sciences. And I'm also Associate Director of AstrobiologyOU, the Open University's astrobiology research group. Some of what you've already heard feeds really nicely into what I'm going to talk to you about. This is a picture of an asteroid. It's a carbon-rich asteroid, and that is the area in which I have the most of my research interests. I'm going to talk you through why I got interested in these particular bodies and what that's meant for what it is that I do today. But I'm going to start in quite a different place to Mark and Moni and tell you who I am. So I am currently a servant employed to a cat called Portia, as well as my day job as a planetary scientist and astrobiologist. I enjoy travel with my husband, and you might be able to tell from my accent that I am from Sunderland, and there's a picture of our amazing beach, but I live in Milton Keynes, which does often feel like a very alien environment to me. Aside from that, what do I do? Well, I said that I am a planetary scientist and astrobiologist. But also employed as a senior lecturer, I also have a significant amount of my work is educating the next generation of either researchers or those that are interested in taking science as a potential career right from the very beginning. So how did I get to this point? Well, I think you've heard from Mark and Moni a little bit about where their careers first started, and here's mine. So I was one of those really annoying kids that kept picking up pebbles off the riverbed and having a look at them and sticking them in their pocket and taking them home. But also I was really interested in looking in the other direction, looking upwards at the sky. And when I was quite small, I was taken to the Greenwich Observatory in London the same year that Halley's Comet passed in close proximity to the Earth. And that sort of sparked my imagination. And I did my very first research project at primary school on the constellations. And when I had run out of constellations to draw in my topic book, I then drew, for some reason, the Earth, the structure of the Earth, its core, its mantle, and its crust. And my parents think that that is where my interest in space and maybe the rocks that are elsewhere in space came from. But when I progressed through school, I had other ideas about what I might do with my life. In fact, I thought about doing something to do with medicine, maybe working in hematology, so interested in blood. I don't know why, I'm really frightened of it. But I wasn't able to take the appropriate subjects at GCSE. I decided to choose what sounded like a career that could be particularly exciting, which was to be a geologist. And so I took GCSE geology at school and absolutely loved it, because I assumed this was going to be where I would go and it would be all volcanoes and nothing else. I could put it with fossils for a little while anyway. At the end of GCSE, I was able to take it for A-level as well. And so I continued that. And by the end of my A-levels, knew that this really was the direction I wanted to go. I definitely wanted to be a geologist, and I definitely wanted to be a volcanologist. So I took an undergraduate degree in geology from the University of Leicester. And again, absolutely loved it. I ditched fossils as soon as I possibly can. But when it came to actually studying volcanoes in my third year, I realized that actually it wasn't quite as exciting as I hoped it would be. I wasn't going to go and visit any active volcanoes. I wasn't going to get to wear hazard suits. I was going to go and stand in a quarry and map some rocks that actually were sedimentary rocks with fossils in them, which definitely was not what I wanted to do. So at the end of my degree, I was really looking at where most geologists went to at that time, which was into the oil industry. And I took a master's degree from the University of Newcastle in organic geochemistry, and thought, well, you know, if I can't study really exciting science, maybe I could just make loads of money instead. And after a year of organic geochemistry associated with oil, I realized I could not think of anything worse to do. It was going to be so boring. However, the science that I had learned in that 1 year was exactly what was needed to be able to study a PhD at the Open University. They were looking for somebody with organic geochemistry experience, and that was to study meteorites. And this is just a screenshot taken from a fireball. It's the Peekskill meteorite that landed in the 1990s. And the idea of being able to study rocks that came from space, I think, as Moni's already talked about, was just so exciting to me. I spent a lot of my PhD in the lab looking at very, very small amounts of rock that largely you needed a microscope to see, and then burning them to find out what they were made of. I wanted to know what the carbon was that was present. Was it present as organic materials, or was it present in minerals? But that gave me a real experience of how you could apply science that I'd been interested in from a very young age to something I never thought that I would be able to be involved in. So yeah, that was my PhD and into my research experience. And I did a couple of periods of research after my PhD, again, looking at meteorites. So where am I now? Well, the chemistry and the implications of what it was that I did during my PhD, that science actually led me to astrobiology, with astrobiology being the study of the possibility of life beyond Earth. And the organic molecules that are found in meteorites are those that, some of them are those that can be found within living organisms here on Earth. Things like amino acids, hydrocarbons, and sugars. So that meant when I found some like-minded people that I worked with at the Open University, we formed the Astrobiology group, which is where we are today. And we're really pleased we've got people like Mark that have come and joined us on that journey. But also in my in the remainder of my time, I'm also a senior lecturer where I have quite a high interest in activities related to teaching and educating others. In terms of the research that I still do, well, you'll see in a moment, I don't ever go in a lab. I rarely go on field work. Hopefully I'll get to go on some at some point, but I'm still interested in the science and where that can be applied. So up in the top right, left-hand corner here, you've got a cross-section through a meteorite. This is a carbon-rich meteorite, like the ones that I have been interested in studying for my adult life. And on the opposite side, we have a picture of Enceladus that Mark talked about earlier. In the interior of Enceladus, the solid core is thought to be made of materials which are pretty similar to those meteorites that I had spent my PhD and my research time studying. So I've been able to make a connection much more recently, which has been of huge benefit to me to be able to see where my science can go, but also the others that I work with. And we've been able to apply some of that to other activities, which include understanding how those types of organic molecules might be contamination within clean rooms. And that can be a problem in the context of something that we call planetary protection, where we do not want to take organic molecules or even microbes out into space, as they may jeopardize the environments that we could visit. But another aspect of my research that I do today is definitely not definitely not laboratory focused, but I'm interested in understanding what the socioeconomic benefits of activities in space might be. And this includes applying very not scientific mechanisms of looking at this. They're much more associated with the social sciences and economics to understand the impact of space on society. And I do all of this now, not myself, but through a huge number of people who I help to support, along with people like Mark, as their PhD supervisors. And I thought it was probably appropriate for me to show you the PhD students. I think I'm missing one from this slide that I have supported as their supervisor, many of which now already have their PhDs, and many of which are also working themselves within space research in various different project areas. What a happy bunch they looked, which is great. Just going to finish with where I am in terms of educating others. Mark and I both teach through the Open University, and we're able to teach our space science and astrobiology understanding in different ways. One of which is I chair our large undergraduate science module called S111 Questions in Science. And whilst I'm the chair, Mark is actually our topic 4 Is There Life on Mars expert for that. So he also makes a huge contribution to those that are interested in astrobiology and space science at the very beginning of their space careers. Because of my work in understanding, in supporting students at very early stages of their careers, I've also won a National Teaching Fellowship. So I'm very proud to be an educator and teacher as well as a scientist. And that has also led to me producing a number of different courses, of which one is a course in planetary protection, which I mentioned earlier, which you can access on the QR code that is on the slide just there, which we have just launched in the last 24 hours, which is really exciting. And that is me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vic. That was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to ask everyone to join us on screen, if that's okay. And we're going to start with some questions. Hopefully some of them have already started coming into the Q&A chat box, and hopefully more will join as we go through. So I think what we'll start with is a fairly broad one that hopefully everyone will be able to answer. I think we're going to start with, what's the best thing about your job? Mark, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah, I can go first. That is a great question. There's actually lots of things I could say to this, but I think one of the best part of my job in my feeling is interacting with others and working as a team with other people who have different points of view, who maybe come from different backgrounds and have different experiences, and using that as a way to kind of help figure out what's going on, either within our science or within the teaching that we do. It's really that interaction that I really thrive on. So, examples for that could be when we're in the field. We have a team with us on field work, and really we make decisions as a team. There's often a lot of flexibility that has to come with these field trips, and you might go with the best will in the world with a certain list of objectives and plans, but the weather doesn't work. The weather does something unexpected, or the place we were working at in Iceland this summer was full of tourists, and that you couldn't access the site. So there's always some flexibility that needs to happen, and we make decisions as a committee. We respond together. We discuss things, and we bounce ideas around. And I think that comes at all aspects of the science process as well, with interpreting data as well. And I think that's actually the part of my job that I find the most exciting, is interacting with others.
Brilliant, Mark. And I think it's a really good point. It's so easy for us to sometimes think that scientists are working on their own in a lab, whereas actually we're working together with people all around the world, which is brilliant.
Yeah, no one succeeds in a vacuum. It's having that external input and testing your ideas against the thoughts and perspectives of others that really helps us achieve success.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Moni, what's your favorite thing?
I would start with saying that the rocks. You can't deny that, the rocks first. But above that, I would say that as somebody who started as a geologist and now having a career in planetary science, and just the fact that, like, it was just a very small dream in my heart when I was very young, that what if I could work in space, and to be actually living the dream and doing it in itself is very exciting, because doing a PhD in itself is quite exhausting, because we are using our brain 24/7 trying to plan the experiments. They don't go correctly, we do the maneuver, so it's like a 24/7 brainstorming. But just the fact that to actually living your dream and doing it in itself is exciting. And at the same time, as a part of my PhD, I also get to do a lot of outreach, which means I just not only am doing the science, but I'm also communicating my science and also trying to inspire that young kids that I visit every year to take up careers or just be courageous enough to pursue what they want to pursue in itself is exciting.
It's a lovely answer. Yeah, that's really lovely as well. Vic, what about you?
So I get to claim Mark's people, Moni's rocks. And also I'm going to say it's that every day is different. Well, actually every minute is different. And that largely comes down to the diversity of the people and the diversity of the science. And I think that is what makes working in any science, but particularly space and planetary science, exciting. And I will say, I still catch myself when we talk about working with different space agencies, or we start talking, when we see pictures that come back, I still get really excited about that, because ultimately that's why I was interested in the first place. But yeah, I claim everything they said, plus every day is different.
And that little pinch yourself moment you have to do when you think this is what we actually do as a job. It is a very bizarre experience sometimes, isn't it? I think this is the question, Vic, that you've just we can ask you here. This is a science question that's come in. I think it's a good one. People always get a bit confused. What is the difference between a meteor, a meteorite, and an asteroid? And I'm going to throw in a comet in there as well.
Okay, so the fireball picture that I showed earlier, the peak scale fireball, that is what we call a meteor. So that's what you see when something comes from space and enters the Earth's atmosphere, and it manifests itself as a meteor. When it lands on the ground, and we may or may not find it, that's what we call a meteorite. A meteoroid is something that's out there in space, so usually a small fragment. And a high proportion of meteorites and meteoroids come from asteroids, which are the very first image that I showed, which was of the asteroid Bennu. These are predominantly in a belt between Mars and Jupiter, rocky and metallic bodies, and the fragments that come to Earth are produced when they may collide together and eject material out into space, and they come on their way eventually here to Earth. And from that, like Moni said, that's how we find out what those asteroids are made of. And many of those asteroids are made of materials from the very earliest of the solar system. They're older than any of the rocks that are here on Earth. So they're the only way that we can get clues to how the solar system formed and how the planets formed. So they're really important. And that's why Moni and I love them so much.
The rocks are very pretty. They are lovely. Moni, I've got a question coming in for you. So, sorry, as I'm reading it. We talked a lot about meteorites, but you do some of your work on the moon as well in lunar studies. Do you want to talk about, they've got a question about, are we going back to the moon soon, and how will your research help it?
So we do plan on going back to the moon soon. It's the famous Artemis Accord that has been in the line for a few years now, where it wants to land the human on the moon again after 50 years. And scaling up with us is the Chinese mission and the mission from India as well, which are in pipeline to land the humans on the moon. So how it is going to, what I am doing, how it is going to help them is that I am basically trying to look at, like I said, figuring out the origin of water. Now, most of the information about the water on the moon that we have is from the samples which has been collected during the Apollo missions, which is from a very small patch of the moon. Like if you look at the moon and the dark patches that you see, we call them Maria. So it's basically that information is from that selected part. We don't have a holistic overview of what is the water distribution and abundance of water on the moon. When these missions are going, the new missions will be targeting different localities. For example, the Artemis Accords, they want to go to the South Pole Icon Basin, and they want to look at the water content, how much it is. Or are we going to get the similar measurements, or they are going to be something different? It's going to tell us. So now that I not only look at the Apollo rocks, but also the meteorites, which can be from anywhere on the moon. So it is just adding up to the big jigsaw puzzle that we don't know entirely.
And this is sort of a question for all of you, but I'm going to ask to Moni.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do? Like, if you had the opportunity, would you do?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, I will. Yes.
Is that a nod
yes.
from everyone? Vic, no.
I'm quite frightened of flying, so going into space feels like it would be a bit of a stretch. The idea of going, yes, but the understanding the practicalities, probably no.
I feel the same. I definitely feel the same. I always like the idea of doing it until I realise you're basically in a submarine in space, which horrifies me. But Mark, you would go?
I mean, I think it is worth being realistic about the risks. That it is actually a lot riskier than flying, but it's getting safer all the time. So I think, if you, with something like a moon mission, there's the they plan to come back, so that's absolutely something that I would consider. When people talk about flights to Mars, there's been ideas thrown around about one-way missions, or it just seems a lot riskier, a lot longer, and that feels like something that maybe I would take a back seat on, maybe not go.
I suppose one of the questions that sometimes I was going to ask you is sort of about whether we'd find life on the icy moons. But I will start with, would you want to go and visit the icy moons in person?
Well, I mean, that would be amazing. I think with our current technology, you're looking at a very, very long trip to do that. And one of the major challenges is not just the amount of mass you'd have to send, because to keep a human alive is a lot more complicated than functioning science instruments on a spacecraft. And we're already really at our limit with things like the Cassini spacecraft or there's two missions on their way to Jupiter right now. One's the European Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, and one of them is the NASA's Europa Clipper. And they are both pretty large spacecraft, but they're still a lot smaller, a lot less massive, a lot less weight than you would need to keep people alive. So to keep people alive, you need a much bigger rocket, a lot more fuel, a lot more complex equipment, and you wouldn't really be able to land because somewhere like Europa has a lot of radiation at the surface. So we would like to keep ourselves well away from that radiation as humans. So whilst it would be very cool to go and get an up close look, I think the robots are going to be able to do that for us in the meantime, because we can design them in ways to kind of protect themselves against the radiation. We don't have to worry about the delicate humans that might get damaged by that.
Maybe when it's safer.
Maybe when it's safer, and we have the ability to launch and fly larger payloads, larger spacecraft with more fuel and more radiation shielding and all the life support you'd need. I think then it becomes actually, very viable.
Brilliant. I think it's a really interesting question, especially where we're at now in space travel and where we're sort of hoping to be in the next 50 years, which is slightly terrifying. I've got loads of questions coming in. I'm going to jump around back to, I think we've got another one here. So one here for you, Mark, about are you expecting that you could find life on an icy moon, or on it, or in it, or underneath it, I suppose is the question.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I try to keep very agnostic about it. I think the key thing is we think they are very likely environments to be habitable. So what I mean by that is that they could support life as we know it. And actually, so Vic and I both mentioned Enceladus, the moon of Saturn, and because Enceladus has these plumes, and Cassini spacecraft flew through the plumes and sampled them, we actually have pretty good evidence that right now, in the present day, the ocean under the ice of Enceladus is habitable. So that means that as types of organisms we have on Earth, they're microorganisms, certain types, that if we took them there, they could live, they could grow, they would be perfectly happy. So that's actually quite amazing. I mean, we have this environment beyond Earth that we know is habitable, but whether there's actually life there, I like to stay very on the fence at the moment, because we don't actually have a good indication either way. And I think either answer is profound and tells us something important. So if there is life there, I mean, that's incredible. I mean, it's a discovery of a second biosphere, a second probable origin of life. If it's happened twice in one solar system, that might imply that it's really common in the universe. But if there's no life there, it also tells us something, because it tells us there's something extra about the Earth, something special about the Earth that we maybe haven't quite understood yet, because we think we have all the ingredients there in Enceladus, and yet life hasn't started. So either way, it tells us something really important about how common or rare life is. So right now, I'm trying not to make a hope or a judgment either way. I think we just kind of wait and see what the data tell us and go and find out.
Very fair. I won't push you. That's a very fair answer. I've got another question coming in. It's a very broad one. So I'll probably start with Vic again, if that's all right. You talked about what you were doing before and sort of your history, what you're doing, but if you weren't working in space science, what would you want to do? Tough one.
There's variable levels of answer to that. So, I mean, the ideal, I would run a bookshop and have a bakery. I enjoy decorating cakes. You know, when I used to do more of it, but when I have any time, I make cakes, decorate them. A shop where I could do that and also have a bookshop on the side is sort of, you know, that's the ideal. Yeah. There'd be, you know, special events, and there may be quite a few cats there too, you know, at least in the bookshop bit, not the hygienic kitchen bit, but that's sort of more that would be nice, wouldn't it? But realistically, that's just not very practical. I don't actually know what else I would do if I wasn't working in space science, because this is really what I've always thought I would do. Moni mentioned earlier that you do a lot of outreach with others and inspiring others. I do also really enjoy that. So something that would let me talk about science, even if I wasn't doing science, would be my ideal. But I can't imagine myself not doing something associated with space and science more generally.
Maybe a science bookshop. Maybe
a science bookshop. That's it. With science themed
are
cakes.
amazing. So they are absolutely stunning. So definitely would be worth coming to. But yeah, I can definitely see you have a taste shop. Moni, what about you?
If I any day have to like stop doing what I'm currently doing, then I might do something similar to my previous job, I would say, because in there it was like I was working for a funding organization, so we are more like felicitating or facilitating, mixing two words right there, but one of those words, like helping, in a way promoting science, that, or otherwise I will go back to what my parents did, farming and gardening and a lot of that.
Okay.
Yeah, some way either connected to nature or science, it has to be.
Very, very good answer. Mark, what about you?
Well, I mean, I was going to say something very similar to Vic, because for some reason I love the idea of having like a cafe or a little restaurant that does just a very low-key, you know, restaurant or cafe in a beautiful place where there's mountains and the sea. So somewhere like the Scottish Highlands. That is my ultimate dream. However, I think just like Vic, I find myself just so drawn back to the big questions that actually just motivate me now. So again, a bit like Vic, I think it's hard to imagine doing anything else, because I mean, I'm very lucky to have a job where I can just think about those questions every day. But yeah, the other thing that also occurred to me was something outdoors. So I love the idea of being out in the mountains every day. I mean, there's jobs where like a ranger, or where I remember reading about a job once where they have people who are going up to the tops of mountains to do weather reports every day. I mean, I'm sure that would wear you down after a while, but and that sounds great from where I'm sat right now.
That is great. I am now seeing in the astrobiology future a coffee shop start to come,
Yeah.
a restaurant in the astrobiology team, which, to be fair, your office already sort of is anyway. So I think we're going to have to wrap up now, but I want to thank each and every one of you for coming and watching this session, and for our speakers for giving such wonderful insight into their roles. It's been really fascinating hearing from all of you about what you do and what you're going to do in the future, and maybe what you'd like to do in the future as well. We have a massive range of resources on OpenLearn, and I think Vic, you've already shared that link, and we'll share that further. It's going to be on the bottom of this the YouTube channel as well. Please keep an eye out on our social media for any upcoming events. We have which is at AstrobiologyOU and at OU_STEM, and we'll put those links in the chat as well. We have an upcoming event in the end of December or beginning of December called Moon Night, which is on site. So if you are interested in that, please get in touch. And thank you for coming, and goodbye.